The day HR told me I was fired for sexual harassment, I felt my whole body go cold. Not because I was guilty, because I knew exactly what had happened. My office colleagues had lied. They had twisted every harmless conversation, every normal joke, every private moment into something disgusting. And they thought I was too weak to fight back. They were wrong. Because my laptop had been recording everything, every conversation, every threat, every fake smile, every plan they made to destroy me. And when those recordings were played in court, the truth finally walked into the room. My name is Claire, and this is the day they learned they had ruined the wrong woman. I still remember the silence in that conference room. That is the part that stays with me the most. Not the shouting, not the accusation, not even the moment I was escorted out of the office like a criminal. It was the silence before all of that. The kind of silence that tells you something is about to break, but you do not yet know if it will be your heart, your job, or your whole life. I had worked at Blackwell Media for almost 4 years. I was not the loudest person there. I was not the one who made every room about herself. I came in early, stayed late, answered emails fast, and did my work without drama. People trusted me, or at least, I thought they did. I was in marketing, and I actually loved the work. I loved the feeling of building something from nothing. I loved the creative pressure, the deadlines, the problem solving. I loved the team I had at first. Then came the new hires. That was when everything started to change. There was Vanessa from HR, with her perfect hair and perfect smile that never reached her eyes. There was Kevin from Analytics, who always acted friendly when other people were around, but cold when no one was watching. And there was Marcy, the team lead who smiled at you while she was digging a knife into your back. At first, I did not think anything was wrong. I thought they were just competitive. I thought maybe I was tired. I thought maybe I was being too sensitive. That is what women are taught, isn't it? To question ourselves first. So when the small things started, I ignored them. The weird looks in meetings, the conversations that stopped when I walked in, the fake laughter when I asked a simple question, the way my files would go missing, then reappear in the wrong folder, the way someone would forget to include me in important email threads, then act shocked when I was confused. I told myself it was office politics. Ugly, but normal. I had no idea that they were building a lie around me, brick by brick, until it was too late. Or at least, until they thought it was too late for me. The first real sign came on a Thursday evening. It was late. Most people had left. I stayed behind to finish a campaign report that was due the next morning. Marcy walked into my cubicle with that smile she used when she wanted to look kind. "Claire," she said sweetly, "do you have a minute?" "Of course," I said, turning toward her. She held out a folder. "I need your approval on the client notes." I took it and looked down. The notes were wrong. Not slightly wrong. Completely wrong. Dates mixed up. Names misspelled. Important details missing. "This doesn't match the meeting records," I said. She tilted her head. "That's strange." "It's not strange," I said quietly. "It's not even close." Her smile did not move. "Are you saying I made a mistake?" I paused. "I'm saying this needs to be corrected before it goes out." Her eyes sharpened. For a second, just a second, the polite mask slipped. Then she smiled again. "Fine," she said. "I'll handle it." She turned and walked away. I should have known right then. The next morning, I found out she had sent an email to the manager claiming I had carelessly delayed client deliverables. That was the beginning. Small lies. Small damage. Small enough that if I complained, I would sound paranoid. And that was exactly the trap. Over the next few weeks, things got worse. A meeting I was never invited to. A project deadline moved without telling me. A report submitted under my name that I had never seen. Then, one Friday, a male coworker named Ethan started making comments about my clothes. Not openly, not enough for anyone to call it harassment, just little remarks. Looks like someone dressed for attention today. Careful, Claire, people might get the wrong idea. He would say it with a smile, like it was a joke. I told him to stop. He laughed. I told Marcy once. She said, "He's just teasing. Don't make it into something bigger." That sentence. Don't make it into something bigger. I heard it so many times in that office. It was never used to protect me, only to silence me. Then one day, during lunch, I sat at the far end of the break room, trying to finish a sandwich while checking messages on my laptop. Kevin came in, saw me alone, and pulled up a chair. "Working through lunch again?" he asked. "I have a lot to finish." He nodded like he understood, then leaned back. "You know, you should be careful with your attitude," he said. "People notice." "What attitude?" He shrugged. "You come off kind of cold, defensive, hard to work with." I stared at him. I had done nothing but work. He smiled in that empty way some men smile when they are testing how much power they have. Then he said, "Just saying, office gossip spreads fast." That was the moment I felt it. The chill. The feeling that something ugly was forming around me and I could not see its full shape yet. So I started doing something that changed my life. I started recording, not because I was planning revenge, not because I was trying to catch anyone in a trap, because I was afraid. And fear teaches you to keep receipts. At first, I only recorded calls and meetings related to my work, just in case someone tried to blame me for a mistake. Then I started recording whenever I had to speak privately with Marcy, Kevin, or Vanessa. I left my laptop open, hidden in a bag on my desk, with the audio app running. I told myself I was being careful. I did not know then how necessary those files would become, because the lie they were building was about to explode. It happened on a Monday morning. I arrived at the office and noticed something strange immediately. People were looking at me, not casually, not like usual. They were staring. Some looked uncomfortable. Some looked angry. Some looked almost triumphant. That is when my stomach sank. I walked to my desk, and there was an email waiting for me from HR. Subject line: mandatory meeting. No explanation. No details. Just a time and a room number. My hands were shaking as I read it. When I got to the meeting room, Vanessa was already there. So were Marcy and Ethan. And one of the executives. Nobody looked surprised to see me. That was the first thing that made my chest tighten. Vanessa folded her hands and gave me the same fake professional smile she always wore. "Claire," she said, "please take a seat." I stood instead. "What is this about?" Marcy looked down at a folder. "We've received a serious complaint." "From who?" "We can't discuss the complainant's identity right now," Vanessa said. I looked from one face to another. Nobody met my eyes. Then Vanessa said the words that made the room go blurry. "You've been accused of sexual harassment." For 1 second, I truly thought I had misunderstood. I actually laughed once, in disbelief. "What?" Vanessa's expression turned cold. "We have a formal complaint stating that you made inappropriate comments, sent unwanted messages, and created a hostile environment." My mouth went dry. "That is not true." Ethan crossed his arms. "You don't have to do this." "Do what?" "Act innocent," he said. "We all know what you were doing." My heart was pounding so hard it felt like pain. "What are you talking about?" Marcy finally looked up, and when she did, I understood. This was not confusion. This was not a mistake. This was coordinated. She said, "Claire, there are screenshots." "Screenshots of what?" "Messages," Vanessa replied. "Comments. Show me." No one moved. I felt my hands clench into fists. "Show me the messages," I said. Vanessa slid a phone across the table. I picked it up. My name was on the screen. My face got hot, but the messages were fake. At least half of them were fake. Some were edited. Some were taken out of context. Some were not even mine. One of the screenshots showed a sentence I had never written at all. Another showed a conversation thread cut off before the actual response. And worst of all, someone had used my name to make it look like I had been pursuing Ethan. I looked up slowly. "This is edited." Vanessa's voice stayed smooth. "That is not what our review suggests. It is obviously edited." Marcy leaned forward. "Claire, please don't make this worse." There it was again. "Don't make this worse." As if I was the one causing harm. As if I was the one lying. I stood up so fast, my chair scraped hard against the floor. "I want a real investigation," I said. "I want to see the full evidence. I want to know who filed this complaint, and I want a lawyer present before I say anything else." The executive finally spoke. "Claire, you are under immediate review. Until this is resolved, you are suspended." "My reputation is being destroyed right now," I said. "And you're suspending me?" Vanessa did not blink. "Security will walk you out." That is how fast it happened. 4 years of good work, deleted, in one morning. I was escorted out past the desks, past the printer, past the glass walls and the coffee machine and the people I had smiled at for years. Some stared at the floor. Some pretended not to see. A few looked satisfied. I will never forget the feeling of that walk. It was like being publicly erased. At home, I sat on my couch in the dark and cried until my throat hurt. Not quiet tears. Ugly, broken, choking cries. I kept asking myself the same questions. How did they do this? Why me? Who started it? What did I do wrong? Then my phone rang. It was my friend Nora, from another department. She whispered, "Claire, I'm so sorry." My whole body froze. "You know?" There was a pause. "Yes," she said. "People are talking about it everywhere." "What are they saying?" She hesitated. "They're saying that you've been making people uncomfortable for months." I closed my eyes. "Did you believe it?" "No," she said immediately. "I didn't. But Claire, something is off. This does not feel normal." That was the first real moment of hope I had. Not because someone defended me loudly, but because someone noticed that the shape of the lie did not fit. After that call, I did not sleep. Instead, I opened my laptop. I found the folder where I had been saving the recordings. At first, I only wanted them as protection, but now, I knew they were my only chance. So I listened, one recording at a time, and what I heard made my hands shake. In one recording, Vanessa could be heard telling Marcy, "We need something serious enough to remove her." Marcy replied, "Then we make it look like a pattern." In another recording, Kevin laughed and said, "She'll panic. People like Claire always panic when you hit them with HR. People like Claire. Like my fear made me predictable. Like my silence made me weak." In the clearest recording, I heard Ethan say, "I'll send the messages in a way that looks believable. Once the screenshots are in place, it's done." Then Marcy's voice, "Make sure it looks consistent. We don't need perfection. Just enough." My blood ran cold. They had planned it. They had sat there and planned to ruin me. Not because I had done anything. Because I had become inconvenient. Because I had questioned them. Because I had refused to play small. I listened through the whole night. Every recording was worse than the last. They joked about me. They discussed how people would believe it. They talked about dirtying my image before I could fight back. They even discussed who would testify if it went to legal review. That was the moment I stopped crying. I became still. Very still. A strange thing happens when you finally understand that someone is not just cruel, but deliberate. You stop asking, why are they doing this? And you start asking, what do I do now? I hired a lawyer the next day. Her name was Denise, and she was the kind of woman who did not waste words. She listened to everything. She listened to the story. She listened to the timeline. She listened to the recordings. Then she leaned back in her chair and said, "This is not just a workplace dispute. This is defamation, retaliation, and likely evidence tampering." I stared at her. "Can I beat this?" She looked me directly in the eyes. "If these recordings are authentic, yes." I almost cried again, but this time from relief. The next step was hard. My lawyer told me not to contact anyone at the company directly. Everything had to go through her. We sent a formal demand for all evidence, all complaint records, all internal communications related to my suspension. Blackwell Media responded by denying wrongdoing. Of course they did. But then something unexpected happened. Nora came forward. Not publicly. Not at first. She sent my lawyer a message saying she had seen Marcy and Vanessa talking before the complaint was filed. She said they were laughing. She said Marcy told Vanessa, "Once Claire is out, the rest of the team will fall in line." That was enough to strengthen the case. Then another coworker, an intern named Lily, sent an anonymous message. She wrote, "I saw Kevin editing something on his laptop, and he said he was fixing the narrative. I thought he was joking. Now, I'm not so sure. Fixing the narrative." I read that phrase over and over, because that is what they had tried to do. They did not want truth. They wanted a story. A story where I was the villain and they were the victims. And for a few days, it looked like they might get away with it. Because power often moves slowly when it feels safe. The company assumed I would be too scared to fight. They assumed a fired woman would stay quiet. They assumed I had no proof. They were wrong on every count. My lawyer filed a lawsuit. The day we did, I sat in the passenger seat of my car for 10 full minutes before getting out. My hands were trembling. Not because I was unsure, because I was angry. Anger is heavy when it comes after humiliation. It sits in your chest like a stone, but it can also be useful. That anger carried me into the courtroom, and the courtroom was nothing like the movies. No dramatic music, no perfect speeches. Just a room full of people pretending not to stare while my life was placed on display. The company had their lawyers. Marcy and Kevin were there. Vanessa too. Ethan sat behind them, looking pale for the first time I had ever seen him. When I walked in, Marcy looked at me like she was offended that I had not disappeared forever. I did not look away. My lawyer squeezed my hand once before the hearing started. Then the company's lawyer began talking. He said my behavior had created significant concern. He said the complaint had been consistent and credible. He said the company acted responsibly to protect its employees. Every sentence felt like a slap. Then, it was our turn. Denise stood up. She was calm, so calm it almost felt cruel. She began by asking for the recordings to be admitted into evidence. The company objected. She expected that, after a brief exchange, the judge allowed them. And then the room went quiet. The first recording played. It was Vanessa. Her own voice filled the room. "We need something serious enough to remove her." Marcy shifted in her chair. Then the next one. Marcy again. Then "We make it look like a pattern." A murmur moved through the room. I saw the executive's face change. Then the third recording. Kevin. "She'll panic. People like Claire always panic when you hit them with HR." My stomach twisted, but I kept my face still. Then came the one that broke the room open. "Ethan, I'll send the messages in a way that looks believable. Once the screenshots are in place, it's done." The company lawyer stood up immediately. That recording has not been verified. Denise did not even turn around. It has been authenticated by forensic analysis. The judge nodded. The recording continued. Marcy's voice. Make sure it looks consistent. We don't need perfection, just enough. That was when Vanessa went pale. Not embarrassed. Not defensive. Pâle. Because she knew. She knew the truth had just entered the room and there was nowhere left to hide. Then Denise presented the internal messages Nora had seen. The timeline, the edits, the gaps in the screenshots, and finally the testimony from Lily. Piece by piece, the lie lost its shape. And then the judge ordered the full metadata review on the screenshots. That is when the most important part came out. The messages had been created from multiple devices. They were assembled, built, fabricated. The complaint was not a misunderstanding. It was a setup. I remember the exact feeling in that moment. It was not triumph. It was release. Something inside my body unclenched. Not because my pain was gone, but because at last, it was real to everyone else. The judge looked directly at the company representatives and said the evidence raised serious concerns about bad faith reporting and possible retaliation. I could not breathe. Marcy stared at the table. Kevin wiped his forehead. Vanessa kept her chin high, but her hands were shaking. Then my lawyer asked for the final recordings. There was one left. The last one. The one I had almost not played. Because it made me feel sick every time I heard it. It was a meeting between Marcy and Vanessa after the complaint had already been filed. Vanessa said, "Once she's gone, the team will stop resisting." Marcy answered, "Good. People like Claire think rules protect them. They do not understand how this works." Then Vanessa laughed softly and said, "She will be too embarrassed to fight back. Too embarrassed to fight back." I looked at them then. Really looked. And I saw it. Not power. Not intelligence. Not confidence. Fear. Because they had not expected me to survive the shame. They had not expected me to gather proof. They had not expected me to stand in that room and let the truth speak. The court hearing did not end there. It took time. Investigations followed. The company had to review the recordings, the internal emails, the complaint process, and the conduct of everyone involved. News spread through the office faster than fire. People who had ignored me suddenly wanted to check in. People who had looked away started sending long messages about how shocked they were. I did not answer most of them. Not because I was bitter. Because I was done performing forgiveness for people who only noticed my humanity after it became expensive to ignore me. A few weeks later, the company issued a formal apology. They offered a settlement. They terminated Marcy, Vanessa, and Kevin. Ethan resigned before he could be formally fired. The executive who had failed to stop it was removed from leadership. And me? I got my name back. That sounds simple. But it is not. A name is more than a line on paper. It is how people remember you. It is how strangers judge you. It is how your own reflection feels when you look in the mirror. For weeks after everything ended, I still woke up anxious. I still flinched when the phone rang. Healing did not arrive like a miracle. It arrived like morning light. Slowly, quietly, one window at a time. I went back to work eventually, but not there. Not to Blackwell Media. I found a new company with a healthy culture, clear policies, and real accountability. And something surprising happened there. People treated me like a person, not a rumor, not a file, not a threat. A personne. That alone felt revolutionary. Sometimes, late at night, I think about the moment they accused me. I think about how sure they were, how easily people smile when they believe the system is on their side, how quickly a lie can travel when it protects the wrong people. But I also think about the recordings, that tiny hidden truth sitting inside my laptop while they smiled at me and lied to my face. They thought I was unprepared. What they did not understand was that quiet women often hear everything. We notice the pauses. We remember the tone. We keep the receipts. And when the time comes, we do not always scream first. Sometimes we wait. Sometimes we build our case in silence. Sometimes we let the truth arrive in a courtroom where it cannot be interrupted. That is what I did. I was not loud. I was not dramatic. I was not reckless. I was patient. And that patience saved me. So if you are watching this because you have ever been doubted, blamed, or trapped inside someone else's lie, I need you to hear me clearly. Being quiet does not mean being weak. Being hurt does not mean being finished. The worst part was not the court hearing. The worst part was the days after it. Because when the truth finally comes out, people expect your life to instantly become beautiful again. It does not. It becomes quiet first, then heavy, then real. For me, the first morning after the hearing, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea that had gone cold and watched sunlight move across the floor like nothing in the world had changed. But everything had changed. My phone would not stop buzzing. Unknown numbers. Old coworkers. People from the office I had not spoken to in months. Some were apologizing. Some were curious. Some were trying to protect themselves now that the story had turned against the people who started it. I did not answer most of them. I just sat there, holding my phone, feeling like I was looking at someone else's life. Then my lawyer called. "Claire," she said, "the company is panicking." I closed my eyes. I was too tired to feel victory, too hurt to feel joy. "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means they are trying to limit damage. They know the recordings changed everything." I let out a slow breath. For so long, I had imagined this moment as revenge. I had imagined looking at their faces and feeling powerful. But when it finally happened, I did not feel powerful. I felt exhausted. That is what no one tells you about surviving betrayal. Sometimes the victory comes wrapped in grief. Because even when you win, you still have to carry what they tried to do to you. A week later, I got a message from Nora. She asked if we could meet for coffee. I almost said no. Not because I was angry with her. Because I did not know how to trust anyone from that place anymore. But something in me said to go. So I did. She was already there when I arrived, sitting near the window with both hands around a paper cup. When she saw me, she stood up too quickly. "Claire," she said softly. I sat down. We looked at each other for a second, neither of us sure how to begin. Then she said, "I am so sorry." I nodded once. "I know. I should have spoken up earlier." "Yes," I said. My answer was honest, not cruel. The truth is, I had no energy left for fake comfort. Nora swallowed hard. "They were talking about you for weeks," she said. "Not just the complaint. Before that, they were setting you up. I saw it, but I was scared." "I know," I said again. She looked down at her cup. "I was scared they would do the same to me." That made me pause. Because that was the heart of it, really. Fear, not just cruelty. Fear is what lets bad people stay dangerous. Fear is what keeps good people silent. I leaned back in my chair and looked at her. "I don't hate you," I said quietly. But I needed someone to say the truth before it reached court. Tears filled her eyes. "I should have." "Yes," I said. And after that, we sat in silence. Not comfortable silence. Not warm silence. Just human silence. The kind that comes after damage. That conversation stayed with me for days. Because it reminded me that offices like that do not survive on one liar alone. They survive on the silence around the liar. And that was maybe the saddest part of all. Not everyone who let it happen was evil. Some were weak. Some were afraid. Some were just hoping the storm would pass over them. But when people stay quiet around injustice, I still flinched when the phone rang. Healing did not arrive like a miracle. It arrived like morning light. Slowly, quietly, one window at a time. I went back to work eventually, but not there. Not to Blackwell Media. I found a new company with a healthy culture, clear policies, and real accountability. And something surprising happened there. People treated me like a person, not a rumor, not a file, not a threat. A personne. That alone felt revolutionary. Sometimes, late at night, I think about the moment they accused me. I think about how sure they were, how easily people smile when they believe the system is on their side, how quickly a lie can travel when it protects the wrong people. But I also think about the recordings, that tiny hidden truth sitting inside my laptop while they smiled at me and lied to my face. They thought I was unprepared. What they did not understand was that quiet women often hear everything. We notice the pauses. We remember the tone. We keep the receipts. And when the time comes, we do not always scream first. Sometimes we wait. Sometimes we build our case in silence. Sometimes we let the truth arrive in a courtroom, where it cannot be interrupted. That is what I did. I was not loud. I was not dramatic. I was not reckless. I was patient, and that patience saved me. So if you are watching this because you have ever been doubted, blamed, or trapped inside someone else's lie, I need you to hear me clearly. Being quiet does not mean being weak. Being hurt does not mean being finished. The worst part was not the court hearing. The worst part was the days after it. Because when the truth finally comes out, people expect your life to instantly become beautiful again. It does not. It becomes quiet first, then heavy, then real. For me, the first morning after the hearing, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea that had gone cold and watched sunlight move across the floor like nothing in the world had changed. But everything had changed. My phone would not stop buzzing. Unknown numbers, old coworkers, people from the office I had not spoken to in months. Some were apologizing. Some were curious. Some were trying to protect themselves now that the story had turned against the people who started it. I did not answer most of them. I just sat there holding my phone, feeling like I was looking at someone else's life. Then my lawyer called. "Claire," she said, "the company is panicking." I closed my eyes. I was too tired to feel victory, too hurt to feel joy. "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means they are trying to limit damage. They know the recordings changed everything." I let out a slow breath. For so long, I had imagined this moment as revenge. I had imagined looking at their faces and feeling powerful. But when it finally happened, I did not feel powerful. I felt exhausted. That is what no one tells you about surviving betrayal. Sometimes the victory comes wrapped in grief. Because even when you win, you still have to carry what they tried to do to you. A week later, I got a message from Nora. She asked if we could meet for coffee. I almost said no. Not because I was angry with her, because I did not know how to trust anyone from that place anymore. But something in me said to go. So I did. She was already there when I arrived, sitting near the window with both hands around a paper cup. When she saw me, she stood up too quickly. "Claire," she said softly. I sat down. We looked at each other for a second, neither of us sure how to begin. Then she said, "I am so sorry." I nodded once. "I know. I should have spoken up earlier." "Yes," I said. My answer was honest, not cruel. The truth is, I had no energy left for fake comfort. Nora swallowed hard. "They were talking about you for weeks," she said. "Not just the complaint. Before that, they were setting you up. I saw it, but I was scared." "I know," I said again. She looked down at her cup. "I was scared they would do the same to me." That made me pause, because that was the heart of it, really. Fear. Not just cruelty. Fear is what lets bad people stay dangerous. Fear is what keeps good people silent. I leaned back in my chair and looked at her. I don't hate you, I said quietly. But I needed someone to say the truth before it reached court. Tears filled her eyes. I should have. Yes, I said. And after that, we sat in silence. Not comfortable silence. Not warm silence. Just human silence. The kind that comes after damage. That conversation stayed with me for days. Because it reminded me that offices like that do not survive the lie grows teeth. That is how it happened in my office. That is how they thought they could crush me. But the truth has a strange habit. It waits. It keeps breathing. And sooner or later, someone opens the door. A month after the hearing, my lawyer told me the company wanted to offer a private settlement. I stared at her across the desk. Do they think money fixes this? No, she said. They think money buys silence. I laughed once, without humor. And does it? She looked at me carefully. That depends on you. I thought about it for a long time. I really did. Because I was not rich. I had rent, bills, a life to rebuild. I had spent so many nights scared, angry, and broke from all the stress that part of me wanted to say yes just to make the whole thing stop. But then I imagined them breathing easier. I imagined them telling each other they had managed the crisis. I imagined my silence becoming part of their cleanup. And I could not do it. So I said no. I told my lawyer I wanted the record to be clear. I wanted the company to admit what happened. I wanted the apology. I wanted the disciplinary action. I wanted my name cleared in writing, not in whispers. Denise smiled when I said that. That smile was small, but it mattered. Because it said, I see you. The next hearing was not as dramatic as the first, but it was more painful in some ways. That was because now the office had to answer for everything. Not just the fake complaint, not just the false messages, the culture, the silence, the way HR had handled concerns before, the way leadership had ignored patterns because the wrong people were saying them. In that room, more truth came out than I had expected. There had been earlier complaints about Marcy's behavior. One employee said she had seen Vanessa dismiss a real report because the person bringing it up was too emotional. Another said Kevin had joked about careers disappearing if people were not team players. Team players? I hated that phrase by then. It had become a shield for cruelty, a way to punish anyone who made power uncomfortable. And then, in the middle of all that, a new detail came out. One of the screenshots used against me had been built from a message thread taken off a shared device in the office. A device that should not have been accessible without proper authorization, meaning someone had tampered with evidence. That changed everything. Now it was no longer just a false accusation. It was deliberate misconduct. I remember the moment the company's attorney realized how deep the damage was. He looked tired, not guilty, not ashamed, just tired. Like the truth had become inconvenient at last, and maybe that was the only thing that got them to act. Because sometimes institutions do not care until the lie is expensive. A few weeks later, the company issued another statement. This one was stronger. They named the terminated employees. They acknowledged serious failures in complaint handling. They announced mandatory changes to HR policies, outside audits, and new reporting protections. I read the statement 3 times. It did not erase what happened. It did not give me back the months I lost. But it was something, more importantly, it was public. That mattered to me more than I expected. Because being cleared in private is not enough when they destroyed you in public. Then came the call I had not expected. It was Ethan. I almost did not answer, but I did. His voice sounded strange, thin, like a man trying to speak while standing in the middle of a collapsed building. "Claire," he said, "I need to apologize." I said nothing. He kept going. "I know it doesn't fix anything. I know I helped. I know I was part of it." I stared at the wall in front of me. "You were," I said. "I was scared," he whispered. I closed my eyes. Everyone was scared now. Scared of consequences. Scared of truth. Scared of being the next one exposed. "I thought if I went along with them," he said, "I would stay safe." That sentence made me feel sick. Not because it was surprising, because it was familiar. That is how cowardice disguises itself. Not as cruelty at first, as survival. But survival built on someone else's destruction is not innocence. It is choice. "You made a choice," I said. There was a long pause. "Yes," he said. Then he asked the question that made my jaw tighten. "Do you think there is anything I can do now?" I almost laughed. Almost. But I did not. Instead, I said, "Tell the truth. Fully. To everyone who still thinks this was a misunderstanding." He did not answer right away. And that silence told me everything. People love apologies when they cost nothing. They love guilt when it stays private. They love redemption when it does not require public risk. But truth? Truth is expensive. And not everyone can afford it once the damage has already been done. After that call, I decided something. I would not spend my healing waiting for people to understand me. That was a trap too. A quieter one, but still a trap. If I tied my recovery to their regret, I would belong to them forever. So I began rebuilding my life on purpose. I made a routine. I woke up at the same time every morning. I went for walks even when I did not feel like it. I stopped checking old emails. I stopped rereading the court documents at night. I cooked real meals again. Simple honest. Nothing fancy. Soap, rice, eggs. Things that reminded me I was a person living in a body that still needed care. I also started therapy. That part was harder than I expected. Because therapy means opening doors you have spent years bolting shut. My therapist asked me a question in our third session. "What did you believe about yourself while this was happening?" I blinked at her. I believed maybe I had done something wrong. She nodded slowly. "That is common." I looked down at my hands. I kept thinking maybe I had misunderstood things. Maybe I was too sensitive. Maybe if I had acted differently, none of it would have happened. "And what do you believe now?" I swallowed hard. That they chose me because I was safe to target. She let that sit in the room. Then she said something I never forgot. "Being targeted is not proof of weakness. Sometimes it is proof that you were visible in a room where honest people were scarce." That sentence stayed with me. Visible in a room where honest people were scarce. It felt like a key turning in a lock. For months, I had tried to shrink the pain into something I could blame myself for. It felt easier that way. If I caused it, then maybe I could control it next time. But I had not caused it. I had simply been there. And for some people, that is enough. One afternoon, about 2 months after the hearing, I received a package. No return address. Inside was a small notebook and a folded piece of paper. The note was from Lily, the intern. She wrote that she had quit the company. She said she was sorry she had not spoken sooner, but that watching what happened to me had changed her. She said she had started saving messages, documenting conversations, and learning how to protect herself. At the bottom, she wrote, "You taught me that silence can be dangerous." I sat on my couch holding that note, and for the first time in a long while, I cried in a different way. Not from humiliation, not from rage, from grief, yes, but also from meaning. Because if my pain had opened someone else's eyes, then maybe it had not been wasted. Maybe. That was the word I lived on for a while. Maybe. Maybe I would be okay. Maybe I would trust again. Maybe I would stop checking doors and windows as if betrayal might still be outside. Maybe healing would not be a straight line. Maybe it would be messy and slow and full of setbacks. All of it was true. Then one morning, I got a call from a recruiter. A woman from a new company had seen part of the public record and wanted to speak with me. I almost said no. My instinct was to protect myself, to avoid another office, another polished liar, another place where smiles concealed knives. But I went to the interview. The office was smaller than Blackwell Media, quieter, less shiny. And the first thing that struck me was this. People looked you in the eye when they spoke. Not in a fake management training way. Just normally, like human beings. The woman who interviewed me, Dana, did not ask invasive questions about my old job. She asked about my work, my process, my ideas, my strengths. At the end of the interview, she said, "We care a lot about culture here. If you ever feel uncomfortable, we want to know early." I remember staring at her for a second. That sentence should not have felt revolutionary, but it did, because in my old office, discomfort had been treated like a nuisance. Here, it was treated like a warning sign. I got the job, and on my first day, I walked into that new office carrying the kind of fear that does not leave quickly. I was prepared for smiling predators, prepared for whispers, prepared for the old pattern to repeat. But instead, what I found was a manager who explained expectations clearly, a team that communicated directly, and an HR system that actually encouraged reporting without retaliation. That does not mean everything was perfect. It was not. No workplace is. But it was honest enough to breathe in. And after what I had been through, honesty felt like luxury. Months passed. Then one day, someone from my old office reached out again. This time, it was not an apology. It was a question. They asked if I had known that Marcy and Vanessa had a history of targeting people they saw as threats. I stared at the message for a long time. Of course, I had not known the full extent, but I had felt enough to be afraid. I replied with only one sentence. I knew the room was unsafe before I knew the reason. That was the truth. Sometimes your body understands a place before your mind can explain it. Sometimes fear is not weakness. Sometimes it is information. Looking back now, I know the hardest part was not being falsely accused. The hardest part was the moment I realized how quickly people can agree to a lie when it is convenient. That is the wound beneath the wound. Not only that they tried to destroy me, but that they almost succeeded because the system around them was ready to believe them. That is why I speak about it now, not because I enjoy reliving it. I do not, but because too many people think a lie becomes truth when enough people repeat it. It does not. A lie remains a lie, even in a conference room, even in a courtroom. Even when your hands are shaking and your heart is breaking and everyone in the room thinks you are alone. Truth does not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it arrives as a recording. Sometimes it arrives as a timestamp. Sometimes it arrives as one person finally saying, "I saw it." And sometimes that is enough to change everything. A few months later, I was invited to speak at a workplace ethics panel. I almost refused. Public speaking had never been my thing. And after what happened, the idea of standing in front of strangers and talking about it made my stomach twist. But my therapist asked me a question that stayed with me. Who are you trying to protect by staying silent now? That landed hard. Because the answer was no one. I was only protecting my fear. So I went. The room was full. Professionals, managers, HR staff, lawyers. People who deal with systems that can protect or destroy. I stood at the podium and looked at them for a moment before speaking. My voice shook at first. then steadied. I told them what happened. I told them how quickly false accusations can become office currency when people care more about reputation than truth. I told them how silence enables harm. I told them how recordings, documentation, and careful record keeping saved me when no one else would. And I told them the part people do not like hearing, that it was not enough to say, "We take this seriously." You have to show it. You have to build systems that reward honesty, protect reporting, and punish retaliation. Otherwise, those words are just wallpaper. After the panel, a young woman came up to me with tears in her eyes. She said, "I thought I was overreacting to something at my job. Now I know I'm not crazy." I held her gaze and said, "You are not crazy, and you are not alone." That moment mattered more than the applause. Because once, I had been the woman no one believed. Now I was standing in front of someone who needed to hear what I once needed myself. Months turned into a year. And one evening, I sat by the window in my apartment watching the city lights turn on one by one. My life was not perfect. It had scars. It still does. But it was mine again. I had a new job, a smaller circle of friends, a quieter heart. Not healed completely, but healing. That is enough for a person who was almost broken by lies. Sometimes people ask me whether I ever think about revenge. The honest answer is yes. Not the dramatic kind, not the movie kind, but the kind where you want the people who hurt you to feel even a fraction of what they caused. I do think about that. I think about it less now, because over time, I learned something important. The real punishment was not me screaming at them. The real punishment was their truth becoming public. The real punishment was their masks falling off. The real punishment was having to live with the fact that the woman they tried to erase was still standing, still working, still breathing, still telling the story. And that is why I am telling it to you now. Not because it was easy, because it was not, but because I need someone out there to know that being falsely accused does not make you powerless. It makes you dangerous to people who depend on your silence. And when you keep your proof, keep your records, keep your dignity, and wait for the right moment, the truth can do what anger alone never could. It can end a lie. It can empty a room. It can reveal every false smile. That night, after the panel, I could not sleep. Not because I was afraid anymore, because I was finally still enough to feel everything. The anger, the grief, the shame they had tried to put on me, the exhaustion of carrying a story that should never have belonged to me. I sat on my bed in the dark, staring at the wall, and I kept hearing the same question in my head. How many other women had gone through this and never had recordings to save them? How many had been crushed quietly, then forced to smile later as if nothing happened? How many had been told to move on while the people who hurt them kept their jobs, their titles, their clean names? That thought hurt more than anything, because my story was not just mine. It was one version of a much larger lie. And for the first time, I understood why speaking up mattered so much. Not because it was comfortable. Not because it made me feel strong every second. But because silence protects the people who know how to weaponize it. So I made a decision. I would not let the story end with their apology. I would not let the story end with my pain. I would turn it into something that could help someone else. The next week, I met with a workplace attorney who also worked with employee safety groups. I brought my notes, my timeline, the recordings, the internal emails, the court summary. She listened carefully and said something that stayed with me. People think abuse in the workplace always looks dramatic. It does not. Most of the time, it looks organized. I nodded slowly. Yes, that was exactly it. Organized. That was the word. They had not exploded in a single moment. They had built a machine. One small lie at a time. One quiet omission at a time. One careful smile at a time. And by the time I understood it, I was already trapped inside it. With her help, I began drafting a public account for an advocacy group that supported workers facing retaliation and false allegations. I did not write it like a confession. I wrote it like a warning. Here is how it starts. Here is how they isolate you. Here is how they twist your words. Here is how they rely on your silence. Here is how you can protect yourself. As I wrote, I realized something else. I was no longer writing only to explain what happened. I was writing to reclaim the version of me they had tried to bury. The woman they described in those fake messages was not me. The woman they painted as unstable was not me. The woman they tried to make ashamed was not me. I was the one who stayed calm when they panicked. I was the one who kept records. I was the one who told the truth. I was the one who did not break. That became important to me, because when people try to destroy your reputation, they do not just attack your job. They attack your sense of self. They want you to begin seeing yourself through their eyes. Tainted, unbelievable, small. I had to learn how to push back against that. Every day, I started by changing the words I used in my own head. Not, why did this happen to me? But, what did they choose to do to me? Not, maybe I should have handled it better. But, I handled what was mine to handle. Not, why did no one stop it? But, who stayed silent when they should have spoken? Those questions hurt, but they were honest. And honesty gave me back my balance. A few weeks later, my lawyer called and told me something surprising. One of the former employees from Blackwell Media had agreed to speak with investigators. His name was Daniel. He had left the company a year before I was fired. Apparently, he had gone through almost the exact same thing under a different manager. Not a sexual harassment accusation in his case, but retaliation and a fake misconduct complaint designed to push him out. He had been too afraid to fight it then, too afraid to say anything. But after seeing my case become public, he decided to come forward. When I heard that, I sat down. I had to, because that was the first time I realized the impact of what had happened. My suffering had not only exposed the people who hurt me, it had cracked the wall enough for others to speak. One voice makes people uncomfortable. 2 voices make people listen. 3 make them investigate. This is how accountability starts. Not with perfection, with courage, and courage is contagious. That same evening, I got another email. This one was from a woman named Erica who worked in a completely different company. She wrote that she had been accused of poor professionalism after reporting repeated inappropriate comments from a manager. Her email was short, but it hit me hard. She said, "I read part of your story and realized I have been shrinking myself for months. Thank you for reminding me that I am not crazy." I read that line over and over. I am not crazy. That sentence is so simple. And yet for someone being manipulated, it can feel like oxygen. I replied with a message that was even simpler. "You are allowed to trust what you saw." She wrote back almost immediately. I needed that. That night, I cried again, but this time the tears were different. Less heavy, more sacred almost. Because pain had started becoming purpose. And when pain becomes purpose, it changes shape. Months passed. The settlement with Blackwell Media was finalized under strict terms. Publicly, they admitted policy failures and wrongful handling of the complaint process. Privately, the financial consequences were severe. Several executives were removed. The HR department was rebuilt. A third-party investigation was launched. Training programs were rewritten. Complaint procedures were changed. I did not expect any of that to feel satisfying, but some part of me deep down did feel relief.